This is Kim Meyer, host of Choose to Rise. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hi, this is Emily.
This is Lindsay.
And this is Elizabeth,
co-hosts of Beauties and Headcanons here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Once you are done with this episode, we hope you'll come check out our show, Beauties and Headcanons, where we talk nerdy to you about fandoms, fan fiction, and all pop culture for nerds that you can think of. A new show comes out every Friday.
Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Beauties and Headcanons. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to How to Write Good. I'm your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled P-O-P-P-I-E. You can figure out how to spell Daniel. I'm not helping you with that. This podcast is brought to you by Public House Media. If you want to follow this podcast on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, you can do that. I don't know why. My hope in the next 30 days is that social media is completely gone, but we'll see what happens. Maybe in the next 5 years. Social media is a really odd thing if you think about it. I don't know. I just think it's weird. I guess it's a way of communicating. It's just not. I just don't think it's actual communication. I think it's like fake communication. It's kind of like everybody's trying to, well, everybody knows that everyone's trying to put on a good face when they're on social media, but I think it's more than that. I think that it's not that people are trying to be professional. They're just trying to, everybody thinks they're celebrities. And I think that being a celebrity is a bad thing. I don't think it's a good thing for people. So I don't know, but social media, hopefully it dies. Hopefully some other thing takes its place that's better, or nothing takes its place, because we had stuff before and it was just fine. So why can't we just have email? Email is amazing, right? Email is probably the best thing ever to be created, besides sliced bread. So we're going to jump to our word of the week, and our word of the week is raze, and it's R-A-Z-E. And if you are familiar with the military or military history, you probably have heard this idea of a city being razed to the ground, and it certainly sounds like it's being picked up, or we're raising the roof. But it actually means the exact opposite, and I think this is great. I like the fact that these sound so similar in English, but they mean the exact opposite. So if you raise something up, it means you're picking it up. Generally, we use that term raise with a Z, means that it means that you are tearing it down completely or demolishing it. So if you ever hear the term, they razed the city, you don't really need to say they razed the city to the ground. You can just say they razed it, and it's assuming that they are completely demolishing it. They're just demolishing the city. So it also, in rare usage, I think it's more archaic. It used to mean to scrape off or shave off. So think of it like that. That's pretty much what you're doing with a city if you're raising it. And it used to mean to scrape off or graze, which is probably why it has a Z at the end, because it's related to the word graze, which I'm assuming. I'm not actually going into the history with this. I'm actually just assuming that it is connected to the word graze. Graze and scrape, maybe. Maybe those two are connected. That's interesting. So yeah, if you think of it like that, if somebody says we're going to raise a city, then you just think of it, they're scraping the city off the map. They're just demolishing it completely. They're just tearing it down. All right, so that is our word of the week. So if you ever hear that, don't think that it is raising it like a R-A-I-S-E, because it's not the same thing. And if you know anything about military history, then you already know that. So I don't know. Pointless word. I think it's an interesting word. I think it's interesting that it sounds the same. I feel like you could do a lot with poetics with it and the word raise, but who knows? You could do a lot of punnery, which I hate that word. I hate the word punnery. So we are on, I don't even know which one this is. I'm going to actually have to quick check, but we are on the next, my next rule. So we're going to be taking a break from this. So some of you may be thinking, I'm sick of your rules. And we're actually going to be taking a break next week. I've got a indie band, I guess you could call them. They're really a indie duo, a musical duo, which I think is really cool. They're a musical indie duo one is from Wisconsin, so my stomping grounds, because that's something I use in regular speech. And one is from Wisconsin and one is from Sweden, I believe. I am almost certain. So that is that's up for next week. Last week I didn't have a guest. I feel a little bad about it. I like having guests on. It kind of breaks up the flow of things. This is rule number 8. And I think that rule number 8 is going to be a really good rule for people to think about. And it's a little more, well, everything is generally philosophical, but this one breaks a little from the norm, just barely. And I think it's actually helpful to break from the norm in this way. So rule number 8. If I said 7 before, I'm sorry. I meant 8. Rule number 8 is paragraphs convey a single idea or experience. And this one needs some explaining, because if you look at other writers and what they're saying, they say single sentences convey a specific idea, one single idea. And I'm saying that a paragraph should convey a single idea. And I'm adding experience onto that as well. So think of this like writing a paper. So if you've ever been in school and you have to write a paper, you have a topic sentence and you explain that sentence fully. And that's kind of what I'm basing this in. And I actually write this way. And you may think this is odd, but I think it's a really helpful way to write, because you can this is what I think about writing, or about anything you're going to do. If you don't know how to do something, you start with something you know and you slowly change it into something else. And that's what's happening here. So with writing, if you haven't written creatively before, think about writing. If you have written something for school, think about writing a paragraph that's just about some informative thing. What you do is you start with a topic sentence and then you explain that thing. And what is the purpose of the paragraph? The purpose of that paragraph is to explain that topic sentence, right? And there's a lot of times, if you heard me bump my drawer, I'm sorry about that. There's a lot of times where you're explaining something in creative writing, and you're doing the exact same thing. You explain something in creative writing, and then you have like a topic sentence. I think this is a good way to start it. So think of it this way. When you're writing and you have no idea what to write, or you don't know how to start, think about what the topic sentence is, right? Think about what your topic sentence is, write your topic sentence, and then explain your topic sentence. Be really, really systematic about it, explaining it. And you don't have to be systematic. Like, you don't have to have every single detail of every single thing related to the topic sentence, but you're just trying to explain it sufficiently so someone can understand that topic sentence. Now, if you take away that topic sentence, we're using topic sentence a little liberally here, but if you take away that topic sentence, you probably have a pretty good content. Now, the thing about writing creatively is that it's essentially writing. I think this is what trips people up. People think writing creatively is having all these disconnected things put together, and you are. I don't think serious writers think that, but I think maybe if you're coming from the outside, you don't realize that it's all connected. You're not. If I'm trying to convey an idea in my writing, I don't have all these disconnected ideas. All the ideas in a single paragraph are connected to a single thing, right? And if you have that topic sentence, it'll help you get all those ideas. But the thing about a creative writing is you don't have the topic sentence. You just go into the ideas. And what's supposed to happen is the person, and a lot of people I don't think realize this, is what happens is the person reads whatever they're reading, and their mind puts all these things together into a whole, and they create that. They don't create a topic sentence, but they create that idea in their head based on all these other ideas. Now, let's switch it a little bit, and then I'm going to go into another thing about this that's a little different. Let's switch this a little bit. So instead of trying to convey a specific idea, if you are talking about anything in writing, you're technically trying to convey an idea. Even if you're trying to describe something, you're trying to convey an idea. You're trying to convey an idea about the thing, because ideas are things in people's heads, and we don't actually have the real thing in front of us. So whatever you're doing, you're trying to convey an idea. It's an abstraction of something else. It's something real or something we experience. But talking about that, so let's just say we're trying to convey an experience, right? With an experience, if you are stuck, maybe your writing is flowing really, really well. But if you're stuck when you're writing, think about, okay, what is this character feeling? And most of the time, most writers are going to say show, don't tell. But what I think you should do to at least start your paragraph is to just tell what's going on in that person's head, right? If the character's feeling sad, you can just start your paragraph with the person's name felt sad, and then you fill in the details of what it is to be sad, right? And after you fill in the details of what it is to be sad, you take out that the person felt sad, and you have the content you need to express this idea of the person feeling sad or happy or whatever it is. You don't want to just say, oh, this person felt sad, because it doesn't actually bring the reader into what you're saying. It's just that, oh, the person felt sad. It's very, they glance over it. They're like, oh, whatever, they felt sad, and they go on with their lives. But what you want to do is you want to try to make a person experience that thing. But maybe you need to start out with something that just tells, and then get rid of it later for your own sake if you're having a hard time. You are allowed to change your own writing. You're allowed to write something really, really bad at first and change it and get it better and stuff like that. But I think that if you're stuck, that's a good way to go. So even though creative writing seems very different to, and there's going to be one more thing I go into about this. I don't know. It's probably not going to be a short episode, because it's never a short episode. But the thing about creative writing, it's very similar to any other type of writing in that your paragraphs are a cohesive whole, right? If I'm trying to convey an experience to someone, I need to have those pieces of that experience connected. It needs to make logical sense and fit together logically, right? There's a logical sense. There's a certain logic to storytelling. There's a certain logic to experiences. Maybe you don't experience logic in your own life. Maybe you think, life doesn't seem so logical, or how the greater scheme of things is set up doesn't seem so logical. But how you experience a story, or how you experience specific things in your life, instances, let's just say that, they do make logical sense if you think about them, or you think how things are connected. So maybe think about it this way. I'll try to explain that better. Think about it this way. If you have an experience in your life, and then you go off and you think about that experience, you can probably see how things connect together, right? And it creates that experience. Now, there are certain things that don't actually need to be the case to convey that experience, and this goes back to finding the essence of something and explaining it, rather than just trying to have every single detail. But there are certain things that don't need to be part of that experience, but when you are thinking about that experience, it's a cohesive whole. You don't experience your experience... Sorry about that. You don't experience whatever is going on in little tiny details. You experience it as a whole. And and like I said before, what your paragraphs are doing is they're putting together pieces. You have to write in individual letters. You have to write in single words. There's a book called Bird by Bird, and essentially what the book is, what that phrase means, or I believe what that phrase means. I haven't read the book, but there's also phrases like, or someone asks, how do you write a book? And it's like, oh, you write it word by word. And I'm going to get back to that. But when you're writing something, you are writing it word by word. You're actually writing it letter by letter. It's a string. It's a single thing. It has one bit of information after another. And what happens is each sentence conveys like a single thought. But then as you read a paragraph, the person kind of gets the general gist of each sentence, and then they forget about that sentence. They don't forget about the details and everything like that. But their brain, and this is probably oversimplifying it, they take all that information, they put it into a bigger whole. It's if you ever heard of Gestalt psychologists, and I think I've mentioned Gestalt psychology before, what they say is like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And what they do is they have these like pictures, and they're partial pictures. They're like outlines, but they miss pieces. And what your brain does when you look at that outline is you put it together. A bicycle, and I think I've said this before as well, a bicycle is more than just a pile of bicycle parts. A bicycle is actually the form. The bicycle is actually the structure of the bicycle itself and how it's put together, and the design of the bicycle. Now, in the same way, even though you have all these bits and pieces of information, these bits and pieces of information are coming together to create an experience in your writing that is a whole. It's more than just, this person did this, then this person did that. You're actually trying to convey an experience. And I guess I harp on that a lot, but I think it's a really important thing to writing. I think if you are a new writer, or if you're an old writer, I think it's good to remember that you're not just trying to convey information to someone. You're trying to make someone experience something. If you're writing creatively, I'm sorry about that. If you're writing creatively, you're trying to convey an experience to someone in some way. You're trying to make somebody feel, you're trying to make somebody see what you're able to see. Like in a previous rule, If you can't make your readers see it, if you can't see it, your readers can't see it, right? You need to be able to play that movie of what's going on in your story in your brain. Otherwise, your readers aren't going to be able to probably see it because you can't even see it yourself. Because if you can see it yourself, you can take what's going on. You can convey that experience to someone else more clearly because you actually experience those details. There's a kind of a paradox, and I'll just quick mention this. There's kind of a paradox in writing, and this isn't necessarily related to this rule. There's a paradox in writing where you convey a bigger idea, or you convey a bigger experience that's beyond the details of what's being experienced, but you convey it in very specific details, if that makes sense. So and that goes back to the idea that the readers are filling in the gaps. And it goes back to that idea of Gestalt psychology, where you're filling in the gaps of things, of the outlines, because there's a bigger structure in your head, right? So you have this big idea, or you have this experience that's more than what you're capable. I don't think you're capable of actually describing one experience completely. I don't think you're capable of doing it completely. Let's just say that. I don't think you're capable of describing any experience completely. But I think you're capable of describing experiences. I think you're capable of describing the core of those experiences, right? And I think you're capable of describing the core of those experiences in a way where someone else can connect to those experiences, and they can take those experiences that you're conveying in your head, and they can put it into their structure, their mind, and they can see what's going on. The paradox of it is you're using specific details that are not the core to convey the core. I really think that's the case. Like, I think that we are trying to, and that's probably where writing gets really difficult for some people. They don't know what to do, and they don't know where to go when they're trying to convey like this core idea, this core experience. They're trying to get across this specific feeling to a person, and they don't know what to do. So what they have to do is you have to kind of go around things. So if you want to convey an experience, for example, just to make it clearer, if you want to convey an experience of sadness to a person, and this is why I think art is so important, and this is why I think writing is so important, and this is why if you ask a writer and they're honest, they're like, oh, what is your book about? And they're like, oh, they maybe can't explain what the book is about because it has to have the story in it to convey what it's about. Because they're just trying to get across an experience. But if you're trying to convey sadness, getting back to my explanation, if you're trying to convey sadness to a person, you could write all about sadness. You could write about sadness all you want. Let's just say you just describe sadness, right? Now, if you just describe sadness, it probably wouldn't connect to you very well. It probably wouldn't connect to somebody else really well. If I describe sadness for you and you read it, you'd probably be like, okay, whatever, the person's sad, or you're talking about sadness. Now, if I even conveyed sadness in a person, you probably would be like, like that's not, whatever, like, who cares? I'm not sad right now. Why should I suddenly be sad because this character is sad? But if I created a character and I made you love that character through the character's actions and what they do and their experiences, right? And I made you go on a journey with that character, and then I had something really bad happen to that character because of that connection to this character, which is unbelievable that you can connect to a fictional person. Because, well, it's not unbelievable, but it's just bizarre that you can. And I think I think it's a good thing. I think it builds empathy. But you go through these experiences with this person, and something bad happens, and then you suddenly feel bad about it, right? You suddenly feel bad. You suddenly feel for this character because you know the character. It's more than just being told the character something as bad is happening to the character. It's more than just being told the actual sadness of the character. It goes beyond that. By using details, by going around the sadness, by kind of beating around the bush about it. That's actually, I just used that cliche incorrectly. By skirting the topic and by circumnavigating the topic and getting everything around it, by actually going through the experiences that lead to that sadness, you can bring about sadness in someone, if that makes sense. And that's what I mean by you have this core experience, but you cannot actually use the core experience because you're not fully capable of expressing that core experience. You can express ideas in relation to that core experience, or you can express experiences in relation to that experience. You can express details in relation to that experience, in relation to that essence, but you can't get to that essence directly, if that makes sense. it's the same thing as you have to tell this whole story to bring about sadness. For example, if I want to express this beautiful sunset, I can't just say the sun is beautiful. I have to describe details about the sunset. At the same time, each one of those details doesn't fully convey that beautiful sunset. And at the same time, I'm relying, going back to that other rule, I'm relying on the imagination of and the past experiences of my reader to be able to connect to them in a way that they can actually see that sunset. And the really difficult thing, going back to everything about writing, the really difficult thing about writing is finding those exact details that are going to convey that in a way, right? And I probably said you're trying to always get back to that core. You're trying to always get back to that essence of that experience. And I may sound like I'm contradicting myself, but you are, in a way, you are trying to use things that are tangentially, they're not directly maybe connected to that experience, or maybe they just don't convey the full idea of the experience, but you have to put those together. So this brings me back to Bird by Bird, the book Bird by Bird. And if you've read the book and you're like, oh, she doesn't actually say this, I can't remember who wrote Bird by Bird off the top of my head, but I believe it's connecting to this idea that you write a book word by word. And yes, you do. The actual act of writing, it's Anne Lamott. The actual act who wrote Bird by Bird. The actual act of writing is word by word. But how you are writing in your mind, how your brain is connecting to what's going on the page is more like paragraph by paragraph. And the reason why it's paragraph, it's sentence by sentence, because first of all, if you just write one word, you certainly can convey a lot with one word if you do it right. And I think that I think I sometimes do it right. I think most of the time I don't do it right, and I probably you should write more, but at the same time, you've got to leave yourself open to try new things. But, you can write word by word, but really you're thinking of a bigger thought, right? Maybe just a sentence, but I would go beyond that. Think of it like this. If you just write one word and you have no thought to how the sentence is going to go, you're probably going to have a bad sentence because you don't have a plan. If you write sentence by sentence and you don't have an idea of how the paragraph is going to go, then you're probably going to end up with a paragraph that may have sentences that don't connect to each other. It goes back to that idea. There's a bigger idea. There's that essence that's going into that. And I'll get back to that in a second. And going even beyond that, if you write paragraph by paragraph and you don't have an idea of where the story's going, or where this chapter is going or where this section is going, it's going to be harder for you, right? And I'll go back to why I say paragraphs convey a single idea or experience. But if you don't have the idea of where that whole section is going, whatever chapter you're writing, that paragraph is going to the next paragraphs may not fit together, and that happens a lot. I think to writers. I think it happens a lot to writers because they just get tired of writing, and it's not that they don't want to write. It's not that they're not enthusiastic. It's just that it wears on you. Like if you do any type of work, you're going to get tired during the day, and I think that's what happens. If an author writes for 3 hours, it gets tiring, like literally tiring. It's not that they're tired of writing or they're sick of writing or they want to give up on writing, which they may. They're just actually getting tired. Their brains are getting a little duller because the day is going on. But then if you have a chapter and it doesn't fit into the overlying idea of the book, it's not going to work, right? If you just have a one-off chapter that actually doesn't go with anything, it's not going to work. So you actually have to keep on thinking bigger and bigger. Now the question is, why did I choose a paragraph? The reason I chose a paragraph is because you only have a certain amount of mental capacity, right? Now, it may be the case that you are extremely, extremely intelligent, and by that I mean you can remember tons and tons of stuff. For you, it may be different. But for most people, you can't remember you can't remember tons and tons of stuff all at once and just keep it spinning in your brain. Most people actually have a hard time with that. For most people, you probably can remember an idea related to a single paragraph, right? And that's why I go down to a paragraph. A paragraph conveys a single idea because your brain can only take so much. And what you need to do is you need to write that paragraph out. Then you need to write your next paragraph, and eventually you're going to go back to those paragraphs and see if they fit together. But first you need that paragraph. You need to get that paragraph out, because if you try to do two things at once, you're not going to do it as well. I think writing, the reason why I think you have to do multiple drafts with writing is because there's so much involved with writing. There's so many ideas coming out of your mind. First of all, if you type, you're typing. So first, that's a mental load. that you have to deal with. Besides that typing, you also have to think about your single sentences, and you have to think about how that sentence fits into how the words fit together in the sentence. So you have to think about the grammar. Your brain is processing the grammar to see if it's good. And if you have a long sentence, it has to hold together more stuff. And at the same time, it has to think about how the sentence fits into the paragraph, how the paragraph fits into the chapter, how the chapter fits into the whole story. And it has to then if you want to think about everything at once, it has to think about all these little details. And if all the little details of the story are correct, it has to think about the pacing of the story. It has to think about whether there was an issue in the story the characters had to deal with, and whether that was done well. And it has to think about whether the characters were developed well, or whether you presented the characters well. There's tons of experiences, right? I'm going back to this idea of experiences. There's tons of experiences you have to convey in a story, and if you tried to take on all the experiences, plus all the work that goes into creating those experiences, like creating paragraphs, creating sentences, picking out the exact words to express those sentences, creating flow in each of your sentences and the story as a whole, you're not going to be able to do it. I don't think there's anybody on Earth who's capable of writing a story. Maybe there is. Who knows? I don't think there's anyone on Earth. I really don't. Think there's anyone capable on Earth writing a story and having all these things circle around their head in a way where they can do it in one go. That's why it's okay to write first draft, second draft, third drafts. You go over it and over and over it. And I think it is the case that you get better and better at it, because it just becomes part of your habit, becomes part of your routine. It becomes part of how you do things, but it does take time to get to that point. Okay. So we're going back to the individual paragraph, and how should you deal with this individual paragraph? And this might be a little abstract, but think about a paragraph like this. When you're writing creatively, you probably shouldn't do this if you're writing a paper for school, if you're writing a report for someone else. If you're writing something that is nonfiction, you probably shouldn't do this. But when you're writing creatively, I think this is a good way to think about it. You have that individual idea and what you're doing with your paragraphs, and you may extend this to a whole entire chapter. Actually, I'll go back to that in a second. What you're doing with your paragraphs is you have a single paragraph and you have one idea that you're trying to convey with that paragraph. And every single you can think of that idea as there's a hub and there's a wheel, and there's a hub in the middle of the wheel, and all the spokes connect to the wheel in the middle, right? And each of those spokes needs the wheel to be held together. But I like to think of it like this. Think of it like a planet, and a planet has a gravitational flow, a gravitational pole, if I can talk. The planet has a gravitational pull, and things orbit around the planet. And that's what I really think. I really like that picture, and I think that everything you put into a paragraph revolves around that specific idea. So instead of trying to just convey something, you don't necessarily, and I think this is going to help you be more creative when you're writing your sentences, you don't necessarily have to have everything logically flow from one other thing. You may be able to do it just by having things connect to that individual idea, right? You instead of having to express every single little detail about that idea, you're expressing pieces, and those pieces are circling, and your sentences are circling around that. They're in the orbit of that single idea. Okay, now let's broaden this out a bit more. Now you're focusing on a paragraph at a time, and you're doing that, right? You're trying to have every single sentence circle around it, and it doesn't even necessarily have to touch the other ideas. It just has to make sense as a cohesive whole, right? Once you read the paragraph, you get to the end, you're like, that actually makes sense because everything connects back to this cohesive whole. And the cool thing about it in creative writing is you don't have to mention that center. You don't have to mention whatever it's orbiting around, and it can be assumed. That goes back to this idea where, to what I was talking about at the beginning, where if you don't know what to do with a paragraph, just create a topic sentence, write everything about that topic sentence, get rid of the topic sentence, and you probably have some good content to create a paragraph. So what you can do too is you can think about your chapter like this. Everything circles around a specific idea in your chapter. So as you're writing your paragraphs, you think about that idea, or maybe after you write your paragraphs, because the paragraphs need attention too. So after you write your paragraphs, you go through them and you make them circle around everything. And then after you write all your chapters, you make sure it circles around this single idea of the story, which kind of makes theme, which creates a theme in the story. And you can base it off of a theme, or I prefer to actually write the story and then let the theme come from the story. So that's what that means. This is what this idea of paragraphs convey a single idea or experience. And just think of that idea of circling sentences. If you remember circling sentences are going around that idea. So you're not writing word by word. You have this idea in your head that's bigger than a single word. It's bigger than a single sentence. And you're writing based on that idea. So that is what I've got for you today. If you disagree with this, that's all right. I think I'm just trying to present my best ideas in relation to writing. And I really hope that these ideas are useful to you. I really do. That's really my hope. I really like to see when people write and they say, "Oh yeah, I get this." I think it's just great. Because some people see writing. I've said this before. I'll say it again because it never gets old in my mind. I never want to seem elitist when I write. I want to reveal what writing is to people who don't understand it. I want them to say, "Oh yeah, I really get that. I understand that." And that's really what I want to convey. And I hope I'm able to convey that. And I hope that it isn't something that I'm incapable of doing. But yeah, so we'll jump to our logical fallacy of the week. And you get a break from my rules next week. There are 6 more rules. So not too long. I mean, it'll get us into January, I think, or February, something like that. But our logical fallacy of the week is, I have to find it. Okay, so there's something called a faulty generalization. So this isn't a logical fallacy, but I have to explain the faulty generalization. So a faulty generalization is where you reach a conclusion from weak premises, all right? So what this is you have these premises and they're not really related to the conclusion you draw. Now, there's something called an accident. I don't know if it's called accidental fallacy or whatever, but it means that you say there's a generalization, and then somebody says then when you are creating this generalization, you ignore something that is a, what do you call it? An exception to the rule, right? So if you think about it, I always talk about essence. An essence is something you need that needs to be the case for something to exist, or it's the if you go back to like Plato, I think it was Plato. He essentially says this is the perfect form of something, right? So, for example, a dog has a snout, it has 2 eyes, and it has 4 legs. That is the dog. So this is the form of the dog. That is the essence of a dog. And if a dog is brown, a dog can be brown, a dog can be pink, a dog can be blue. A dog does not have to be one of those colors to be a dog, right? A dog does not have to have a collar on to be a dog. A dog doesn't have to have and I guess you could say, oh, a dog doesn't have to have 4 legs, but a dog as a dog generally has 4 legs. The perfect form of a dog has 4 legs, right? And almost every single dog has 4 legs, and once in a while one doesn't, and that's an aberration from the norm. That's something that isn't typical. But an accident is something that you do not need, right? So if I have to be me, I actually don't have to have hair. I'm simplifying it, but that's essentially what it is. It's something that you don't need to create that perfect form. So if there's an accident in a faulty generalization, it means that you are ignoring an exception to the generalization. All right. And, it's with this exception. So to explain this, to explain this more fully, think about it this way. So what you're doing is there is an exception to the rule, right? There is an exception to whatever rule you have, but you try to base your argument on that exception. Now, this isn't mine, but I'm going to present it to you. Okay, so the exception, so generally when you cut someone with a knife, it's a crime, right? But surgeons cut people with a knife, right? And it is not a crime for them, so they're an exception to the rule. So if I made a logical argument, cutting people with knives is a crime, surgeon cut people with knives, surgeons are criminals, that is incorrect. So that is called the informal fallacy of accident, right? Where you're using an exception to a rule, and you're creating an argument that is connected to that rule, but it doesn't make sense because it's an accident. It's something that is that's an exception. So that's what I've got for you this week. We will be next week will be with the musical Duel, the indie group, and I hope it goes really well. I hope you really enjoy it. I'm looking forward to it. All right, that's all I've got. As always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good.